Apple, we're going to give a couple of minutes to allow the crowds to kind of come in and find a seat. I want to say thank you for coming out on a Wednesday morning. This crowd on a Wednesday morning is like twice what we normally have on a Wednesday morning, and we don't have video overflow. So we're going to take up every square inch in this room today. So if you've got a seat in between you and somebody else, squeeze into the middle so that there is room for your friends on the edges. And then actually this morning, we are doing a practice called story circles. So for this morning only, if you would like to gather with 3 or 4 of your friends and find a spot on a side on the floor to sit in a circle, that would be totally okay today. If that feels comfortable, we're not doing like a worship kind of thing. It's going to be a guided story circle morning. So if you'd be more comfortable finding a spot around the edges of the room today, that is totally fine. I'll be back up in just a minute. Day and classes start at 11, and we promise to get you out in time to get to your class. I want to make one quick announcement before I turn it over to Michaele to lead and guide us this morning. We've been doing spiritual practices all week. You've seen them on our Instagram, Spiritual Life at Trevecca, after every service, before some services. Today, there are 2 options for a spiritual practice that you can actually earn chapel credit for. Michaele asked us to do a guided prayer tour in our Trevecca neighborhood, like around us in the Napier area. So we have a bus, a Trevecca bus, and Iris Gordon and I and a few students are going to gather at the Circle parking lot outside of Bud Robinson at 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., and we will load that bus until it's full each time. And then we're going to head out and go visit several of our community partners and have prayer at some different locations with them around our neighborhood. So if that's something that you would be interested in, it counts for a regular chapel credit. We'd love to see you at 11 or 1 o'clock until the bus is full. All right, Michaele, I want to welcome you to the stage, and I'm excited, friends, for what we have to experience together this morning. Let's welcome Michaele.
Thank you. I have to say, I am incredibly encouraged by the way that you are showing up to the things that Jesus would have us hear this week. And so I know I have heard from several of you, thank you, thank you. I want to say to Trevecca community, thank you. This is a two-way street. You can only preach if people want to listen. And we can only experience the Spirit together if we're open to receiving the Spirit together. And so I'm really grateful for that. Yesterday, we got to talk about Jesus as our neighbor. We got to spend time in the story of Jesus crossing borders to be a good neighbor with the woman in Samaria. And we heard an amazing testimony from Dr. Jeff Wells about the work of empathy and how that shows up when we hear and are exposed to one another's stories. Today we're going to do maybe a unique practice, and I want you to think of it really as serious spiritual practice, okay? And this is because when we are able to hear one another's stories, there is something that happens in us if we let it. There is a work of listening that we need to learn how to do that enables us to be fully present to one another and more fully present to what God wants to do in our midst. So that's what we're going to practice today. We're going to practice listening to one another and have opportunity to tell good neighbor stories. So I'm going to walk us through. You will have an opportunity to share. You also don't have to share, okay? That's one of the baseline things of any time that you're inviting people into stories. Our stories are incredibly sacred, and you can't demand them from people. There's a quote I love that's been used from many different folks, but it says that the soul is shy. And if we want to coax out the shy parts of our soul, we have to give space. We have to give permission. We have to help make it safe. So that means that we can't demand that someone show up in a vulnerable way. But we can try to create a space where we share safety for one another, and we share a posture of showing up brave. So even before we begin, I want to share with you, if we are endeavoring to hear one another's stories and take on this practice, we need to take on together a brave, safe, covenantal posture. And this means that we are adhering to three things. That one, our stories are confidential. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't ever talk to this person about that story again. What we mean when we say confidential is that every person's story is their own to tell. So if you hear someone's story and you're like, wow, that would make a great post, that would make a great sermon illustration, I would love to tell so-and-so, it relates, that's not yours to tell. This space is a story. This space, you are receiving the story, but you're in the posture of receiving, not sharing it after this. And then we also take on a posture of no preaching or advice. In story circles, it's a very different way of dialogue with one another, and it teaches us maybe how we can be in dialogue outside of story circles too, because I think it's good for us. But generally speaking, I don't know about you, but in general conversation, most of the time we listen long enough to know what we need to say next. And even as we're listening to what the other person is saying, we are formulating our response as a rebuttal, or inserting our differing opinion or our same opinion, or offering our experience that might relate or not. And this is an opportunity for us to listen for listening's sake. We're not trying to get to some prescribed outcome. We're not trying to convince someone of our own agenda or opinion. We are literally listening, offering one another the gift of being heard. And the goal is that each person would have that gift of being heard, and that each of us would practice listening. Which means when we have an opportunity to respond, we don't need to preach at one another. Do you know what I mean when I say preaching in this context? It's like, I like what you said, but listen, I think da 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 da. It sounds like a kindness, but really you're correcting and trying to teach them what they should do better, or giving advice. We're not doing that. So the way that we're going to respond is very prescribed, actually, because we have these ingrained habits, and we need some fallback language to know how to respond if we're not giving advice or centering our own story or trying to fix problems. So when you hear someone's story, what you're going to say in response is, ready? Thank you. That's what you're going to say. Let's try it together. Let's pretend like I just finished sharing my story. The end. Look at that. You don't have to tell me anything else. It's beautiful. If you don't feel like that's enough, you can add a few more words and say, thank you for sharing. That's allowed. The final thing is that we're going to keep this story space sacred. Our stories are sacred because each of our stories include parts of God's story. Each of us created in the image of God, each of us experiencing pieces of God on earth, are carrying sacred truths. And to honor that, we will not invalidate one another's stories by rolling our eyes, by looking at our phones while someone else is talking, or by shrugging it off or making a comment that seems like I don't believe you or I don't think that that is worthy of my time. I don't think anyone in this room would do that, but we're not doing that today. But there's another more, easier way that we can discredit or invalidate or not treat one another's stories as sacred, and that is by not giving one another time. In story circles, each person receives the same amount of time to share their story, so there's not one person that dominates the conversation. For today's story circles, we will only be in groups of 3 or 4. Please do not go over that. It makes it very hard to keep on the schedule together because we're going to go through a format. And then within that, I'm going to ask that you help monitor time. I will monitor the large group time from the front. It's really helpful if somebody just pulls out their phone, maybe with, hopefully with all, like do not disturb is great. Like take off all of your little bands and bars and banners that pop up, right? But run the clock so that you can all see together how much time so you can monitor yourself. That's one of the ways that we keep this space sacred. So, I cannot tell you this strongly enough. No one is forced to share your story. However, if you choose to sit in a group where other people's stories are heard, you are agreeing to this way of responding. Whether or not you share your own story, you are agreeing to this way of responding to the stories that are being shared. So I'm going to invite us, before we split up into groups, to read together this invitation to brave space. Is that big enough? You all can see that, right? And we talk about these covenantal postures as brave and safe space. We can't make anything fully safe, but we agree to make it as safe as we can and to show up as brave as we can. So let's read together. Together, we will create brave space. And we will work on it side by side. I invite you now to either get into a group of 3 or 4 and spread out on the floor across the room, or turn your chairs together. And once we feel like we're all in our story circle configurations, we'll move ahead. 3, 4 people. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 2.5, 1. Okay, it looks like everybody is in place. Is there anyone that doesn't have a group formed and you're looking for a group? Okay. All right, I remind us that the goal of this exercise is to give one another the experience of being heard and to grow into the practice of listening well. Because we are a room full of people, more people than we expected, I'm going to ask you to keep your sharing volume only as loud as the people across from you need to hear, okay? That can get real loud in here real fast. Also, story circle rules state that only one person in the story circle is talking at a time. So at any given moment, only one person in each room, in each circle, should be talking, and yet that's still going to be a lot of people talking at the same time in the whole room. So please try to keep the volume as low as possible with that, okay? We're going to warm up a little bit, so I'm going to invite you into our opening practice, and that is sometimes it's really hard to think of one word. It does say one word. I'm going to expand it to 1 to 3 words if you can't land on one, okay? So share 1 to 3 words that describe what you are bringing with you today. How are you showing up to this space? Before we have an opportunity to share in this round and everyone after, we're going to pause so that we have thinking time. Not all of us are verbal processors, right? Some of us need time to think before we speak. It works best for everyone that way. So I'm going to give us a moment to think about the 1 to 3 words that we are bringing with us today. I will share first, and then you will share, and you'll have the same order every time, okay? So the way that we're going to do this is the person who is, the person whose birthday is closest to today is going to be the first person sharing in your group. Yeah, take some time to figure that out. Okay, just as a test case, did you notice the decibel level that we just got to? Let's try to bring it down a little bit. So, in just a moment, the person with the birthday closest to today will share first, and then you will go to the left. Still seems to be some confusion about birth dates or something. Do we have birth dates and order figured out? Are we good? Okay. Okay, friends. It's time to come back. Practice our listening. Do I just need to do shh? That's the secret. Okay, now I know. Thank you. So we're going to pause for a moment of thinking, and then we'll begin sharing. Without any need for explanation, I'm just going to share my 3 words, and then you can share yours in your order. My 3 words are tired, hopeful, energized. Okay, has everybody been able to share your 1 to 3 words? Anyone need more time? Okay, great. Good job in the opening practice, getting warmed up. We're going to move into the actual story. And our story, what we call it as a story conduit, when we are telling our stories in story circles, there's usually a conduit that helps us find what part of our own stories we're going to share, because all of us have much longer stories, much more detailed stories than can ever fit into one practice, right? But today we're going to come at it from the story that we read together last night in John chapter 4. If you weren't able to be with us, or if you need a refresher, here's the beginning part of that story. Jesus knew the Pharisees had heard that he was baptizing and making more disciples than John, though Jesus himself didn't baptize them, his disciples did. So he left Judea and returned to Galilee. He had to go through Samaria on the way. Eventually, he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." So Jesus had to go to Samaria, but most people, like Jesus, most Jewish men, Jewish people at all, would travel days at a time to go around Samaria. And Jesus purposefully crossed a border to show up in territory that did not belong to him, to be a good neighbor to this woman and to the Samaritans that he met through her. So our question today is, how have we experienced something similar? You can answer this in 2 ways. One, when has someone crossed some kind of border or barrier to be a good neighbor to you? Or 2, maybe we've had the experience in the opposite. When have you felt the need for someone to cross a border or a barrier to be your neighbor, but they didn't? Because Jesus is the very best neighbor to us. We want to be good neighbors to one another, but we know it doesn't always happen. And so if you have more of a grief or lament story about when you did not feel the presence of a good neighbor, I want you to know that that's okay to share in this space too. So when have we experienced someone crossing some kind of border or barrier? In a physical, emotional sense. It doesn't have to be like tangible all the time, these borders and barriers that are erected between us. I want to give you a moment to think about that, and then I'm going to share my story to answer this question before you have an opportunity to share yours in your groups. Okay, and to tell my story, I'm going to set a timer for myself. It says on here that each person has up to 3 minutes. Because we're so big today and we have gotten a little bit behind schedule, I'm going to ask for each person's story to be a 2-minute version. So there will be some details that don't fit, I know. But tell 2 minutes of that particular story, and then we'll have hopefully more time for conversation, and you can fill in details if we need to later. So my story is about someone crossing a border to be with me. And this was several years ago when I went to go to a funeral. I was just getting to know a family that had been coming to our church. They were the 2 younger daughters of this family. And I knew a little bit about their family, didn't know many of the other relatives well at all, but I knew that a grandparent had died. And so I found out when the funeral was, and I went. I got the time wrong, and I showed up a little bit late. So I was embarrassed, and I was walking in the back and found a place to sit, in this funeral home, hopefully not drawing too much attention to myself. But almost as soon as I walked into the room, I realized I was the only white person there. And everything was in Spanish, and I am not in the least bit bilingual. And I felt like I had made a huge faux pas. I was like, I just wanted to support these parishioners, but now I feel like I don't belong here, and I don't want to draw more attention to myself, and I felt bad about being late. Well, across the room, everybody looked and saw me walking in, but across the room, another pastor, a bilingual pastor that I knew in town, saw me and got up from where she was sitting with her own family and walked to the back of that little funeral home and sat down next to me and was my personal translator for the rest of the time. Not only did she translate like words, but she would also lean over and say, now this is with the part when da 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 da, and this is why. And she was helping me understand what I would otherwise have been totally lost at. She was a very good neighbor to me, crossing over a literal barrier of a room, but also a language barrier to be my neighbor. And my timer is going off. So I'll give you an opportunity to share your own stories in 2-minute segments. Here's the hard part. If your group gets done before we're ready to move on to the next piece, please don't just pick up conversation. Let your stories sit among you. We have a special way of talking about our stories after they are shared. And please try to keep our room volume down as low as possible so that we can hear one another's stories in our groups. Okay? I will give you cues to help you know when the timer is running low, but if someone in your group can have a watch going, that will help each of you keep to 2 minutes as well. All right, ready? Share when you're ready. We are halfway through, but I think a lot of groups are finished, so we might not need the whole time. Please keep your conversations very low if there are groups near you that are still sharing their stories. If your group has finished sharing your stories, can you just have someone in your group lift up a hand so I can tell where we're at? Okay, the majority of us. Thank you. Any groups still sharing or that haven't been able to do everyone in your group? Any groups still? Okay. All right, if you are still waiting to hear the end of someone's story, tune me out, listen to them. But I think the majority of us are ready to move on to crosstalk. So let me tell you how this works, okay? As I said before, in story circles, one person talks at a time. So if you imagine a ball or some kind of object passing back and forth between two people, this is what happens in crosstalk. It's not open fire dialogue where everybody jumps in together. But we are going to have an opportunity to share, because when we heard each other's stories, all we did was say thank you, right? So now is an opportunity to talk to that person about what you heard. But the whole goal of this crosstalk is to give one another the experience of being heard. So you can share a comment or a word of encouragement about what you heard to just tell them, hey, I really appreciated this part of your story, or I really feel like you were, whatever you want to say about that. That is not fixing or advice, okay? It's a word of encouragement, but it's not fixing or advice. Or you can ask a question to provide clarity about what someone shared. Now, that can be tricky because sometimes we're curious beyond, like we've heard them, we've heard what they have to say, but we want something different or we want something more than what they shared. So really do some work to figure out, am I trying to figure this out for my own curiosity, or do I really want to be clear on how I understood what they shared? Does that make sense? And then if someone asks you a question about your story that you don't want to answer, you don't want to go into further detail, you have no need to do that. You can just say, I don't really feel comfortable talking about that, but thanks for your question, okay? So I'm going to see how we need to move and give us more time if we need it, but I'll start with 5 minutes. Remember, you're just talking one at a time, and it's okay to like sit in quiet for a minute until somebody thinks of what they need to say. We're not going to go in any specified order, okay? So just address the person whose story you want to talk about and say, I have a question about your story, or I have a comment, or I want to say this to you. That person can respond. Then the conversation goes quiet until the next person pops up and directs it to another person. Make sense? Okay? All right, 5 minutes is on the clock. Left for crosstalk. If there's someone that has a question or comment that hasn't been able to share, please yield them the time so they get a chance in our last minute. Okay, crosstalk time has now finished. I recognize that this is an imperfect way to do this because some of our stories need more time. Some of us didn't get all the questions asked or answered. Some of us didn't feel fully comfortable in a room full of people. I get that. But I hope that this gave you an opportunity to experience, at least in a small way, what it feels like to listen well and to be heard. We'll take a moment just to talk about the practice as a whole before we leave. But for now, I want you to reflect in one more period of quiet on the stories that you've heard and the brief bits of conversation that you had in crosstalk. And think about what you are taking with you from this experience. So similar to how we opened, what 1 to 3 words describe what you are taking with you after hearing the stories around your circle. So take a moment to just reflect, and then I'll give us an invitation to share. My one word is connection. Go ahead, start with the person whose birthday is closest to today and go to the left. Okay, I think we have moved beyond 1 to 3 words, and some of us are saying a whole lot of words now. So we're gonna call it there. I want to just take a few minutes and reflect on this practice as a whole. I'm curious if anybody would be brave enough to say, this felt awkward. Any hands? Yes. I see that hand. I see that hand. Thank you for your honesty. Yes. Agreed. It does. I wonder if there's anybody that would say, this actually, awkward or not, kind of felt refreshing. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone want to shout out a word or two that made it refreshing or surprising or good for you? Being seen. Thank you. Any others? Say it again. Showing empathy. Encouraged. Similar? Yeah, finding out that you actually have something similar. Vulnerability. Say that again. It sounds like germs. I don't think that's what you're saying. You want to try it again? Heard. Thank you. So much better than germs. Heard. Yes. So I want you to consider, even if you're not in prescribed story circle settings, what are the ways in which you can practice listening to one another in ways that give one another the experience of empathy, of being heard, of being seen, of finding our similarities, of being encouraged? I would like to submit to you that a couple of things are required in what we did together today that made it possible. One is intentionality. It's really hard to hear one another well if we're not trying. Intentionality is important. Putting our devices away, slowing our paces down, leaning in to hear one another well, takes intentionality. 2, it requires listening. I know that feels like obvious, but hearing or overhearing is different than listening, right? Like we hear a lot of things. There are noises all over the place, but sometimes the work of listening requires less noise and paying closer attention to the one thing that we want to listen to or the one person that we want to listen to. I think Jesus offers this to us in prayer, and we also offer this to one another anytime that we give each other the space to tell each other's stories. Thank you for jumping in, for taking this risk on, and for listening to one another well, and for following my direction in this process. I apologize for any and all imperfection in this process, and I pray that you forgive me for any way that it could have been better. There's lots of ways to do it again. Receive these words of benediction, and please put your chairs back as we leave together. Friends, may you go knowing that you are heard, and may you exercise muscles to listen well. Amen. Please put your chairs back.